Welcome, everybody. It really is great to have so many participants here, especially knowing that it is a government holiday in India, but trying to balance the time zones between all the areas where we knew we'd have interested participants. For those of you that are familiar with the Center for Strategic International Studies, a lot of times it's really kind of well known for its work in defense and security. But over the years, it's really been expanding its portfolio. And really, the India program that I lead, my name is Rick Rosso, has kind of been at the forefront in a lot of those ways by looking at development work. And for us, actually doing a lot of work tracking what's happening in India, not just at the national level, but at the state level. A number of projects related to that and climate and healthcare. But we are really excited to announce our newest vertical, which is going to focus on water, wastewater, and sanitation, an area I've wanted to move into for quite some time. And sometimes when you find exactly the right candidate to lead that work, you jump on it and take a big step forward. And for us, that person is Ms. Bhavna Prakash. We'll hand the floor over to in just a moment. The initiative that we're trying to launch on water, wastewater, sanitation prioritizes key areas like policy, governance, private sector participation, and the connections between water and sanitation and some of the other critical sectors like environment, climate, energy, and agriculture. Additionally, we're working on some written materials as well to help unpack not just what's happening in India, because that's been fairly well covered, but what are emerging roles the United States can have as a partner in water and sanitation. Public-private dialogue, of course, is essential for this. Accelerating a water and sanitation agenda, it becomes more sustainable if companies find a way to go in, work with government, and find a way to make and build markets. I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today, especially extending a warm welcome to Ms. Tara, the Additional Secretary of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, for participating in this dialogue, especially as I mentioned on a government holiday today. I also want to express my gratitude to Sumila Guyani from the World Bank Group and Austin Alexander from Xylem for being here today. And now I'll hand over to our special star, as I mentioned before, Ms. Bhavna Prakash, who's going to be leading this work for the team here. So Bhavna, over to you.
Thank you, Rick, for the introduction and giving us an overview. I'm excited to be moderating today's panel featuring leaders in water and sanitation who are at the forefront of public offices, development initiatives, and private sector efforts. Thank you to our panelists for joining today's discussion, and also to our attendees for taking the time for this important discussion on public-private dialogue, advancing water and sanitation initiatives in India. As Rick mentioned, this is a pivotal moment for India's water and sanitation sector. Over the last decade, Government of India has invested more than 100 billion in national programs on water sanitation and urban to ensure universal access of these services to its citizens. These efforts have improved infrastructure and services, promoted inclusive sanitation, introduced new technologies, and leveraged behavior change communication, all aiming to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 6. However, public spending alone cannot meet the growing needs for SDG 6. We need new capital, improved capacities, partnerships, and innovative business models in the water and sanitation sector. A recent World Bank report also estimated that only 2% of the current water investment comes from the private sector. We will unpack more of that, as we go into the discussion today. As India's national programs move to the next phases, there are new opportunities for private sector participation in expanding water and sanitation economy, especially with rapid urbanization and the increased need for infrastructure and sustainable services. And all of that is happening in the backdrop of climate change. Increased private sector participation is vital and should be strategically planned. Today, we aim to highlight some of the issues and discuss a way forward. At this moment, I would also request our attendees to use the chat button in the window and send us your questions. We'll include them as we move forward. Without much ado, we'll get started, and I would request the Additional Secretary, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, if you could please share with us the current state of water, wastewater, and sanitation in urban India, and also what are your current priorities?
Yeah, good evening. Thank you for the opportunity. As of now, urban India is actually consisting of 4,900 cities. And as we are talking, I know 1, 2 more may get added. And then there are around 10.5 crore. So I have to say it in millions, 105 million households in this area. But I would rather say we should plan for at least 120 million households, because in India, the cities are statutory in nature. That is, you have to declare it as a city by the state government, the federal government. So though there are areas which have urbanized nature, but still they may be existing as rural areas for some conveniences. Therefore, we are looking at a major, the numbers are very staggering, and it is around 120 million households, which we should be planning for. So where do we stand today? Unfortunately, we started with around 44% of tap coverage to the households, drinking water tap coverage. It doesn't mean rest of the people were not having water, they were, but from their own sources. Here is a centralized or, provisioned water was only to 44%. 44% of what? 44% of 78 million households. And from there, we have reached 70% of 105 million households as of now. So as we are chasing the target is also chasing itself to increase. So that is the scenario in India, where you have a train which is running at 200 kilometers per hour, and you have to get into it and repair it and get out. So it's that. So we have a major issue. But thankfully, what government did is, when they were focusing on urban water, they also focused on rural water, in fact, pumped in more money. So there was resources coming in both as water from for rural and urban areas. But the nature of problem differs. So as we are saying that we have around 70% coverage in the urban areas from the provision water, which is supposed to be clean, accessible, quality-wise, quantity-wise, it should be adequate, and affordable. It is affordable because we really don't charge anything for water in India, literally, because I think our culture has a problem. We think that water is something which nature gives, and what nature gives, how can you charge? So that's where the thing has to be now tackled broadly. Though we are tackling it, there is a movement, but I think that broadly. As far as the wastewater, that is, we won't call it wastewater, used water is concerned, it's a resource by itself. We have on-site sanitation, that is through septic tanks or soak pits, whatever you can call, in around 60% of the houses, and 40% of the households are connected to sewer, and mainly in the big cities. So, and again, if you look at these 4,900 cities, India has a very interesting thing. 80% of the population will be covered in the 750 cities. So it's not that though the number of cities are more, it's not that they're equally distributed or something. It's very top heavy. There are, say, 500 cities which account for 65 to 70% of the population. Rest 4,400 cities account for 30. Even if you add another 200, you're done, almost 85%. So another 15% across all these cities. So this is a very unique situation where there are large urban metropolitan agglomerations which are required to be catered to. And what does that create? That creates a problem, stress on the source. So Indian cities are slowly moving away from source within to source from outside. So that's a major challenge. Like, you are dependent on one major river or one major water body. The day there is a risk to it, then you have a problem. So therefore, we have to diversify our source dependence. That is another problem or another challenge. I wouldn't call it problem, but another challenge which we have to tackle effectively. That means you have to rejuvenate your water bodies. So as of now, Indian government runs a mission called Amrut Mission. And we are spending around $32 billion in total with the federal government and the provincial governments together. And we want to reach up to 85 to 90% of this population. Means we want to reach up to 90 million households, at least through this mission. And rest of the effort should come from in the next 5 years. That's next 3 to 4 years. Yeah. So now that's where we are. Now, this 40% water sewer connections, out of which we are almost treating only 45%. 50%. So I think, again, sewerage treatment is a major challenge, and reuse is another angle which we are looking at. The present mission mandates cities to use at least 40% of their used water to be treated and reused for industries, and 20% overall. That's a very low ambitious target with not much ambition, but we are into the entry level. As of now, there is a major mission going on. See, one of the major issues which we face is, though we are providing clean water at the water treatment plant level, reaching home, there are challenges. When the water reaches the home, either within the home, because there is overhead tanks, we don't have 24/7 water supply in all the cities. So therefore, there is a problem of storage, and the storage in the private realm may have got cleaned or not. And then you come to the this thing. That is one qualitative angle has to be really reflected upon, though I think by and large we have improved a lot. Because in India you don't see a lot of cans going around. Earlier there used to be one time when you used to have this whole amount being spent for water. And treatment and reuse is picking up. So that's where we stand. And we are also rejuvenating water bodies. We are putting a premium on rejuvenation of water bodies. Now, all that is being done with partnership with startups, with communities, apart from the major contractor tender project kind of paradigm. Yeah, so it's a lot of things are happening, and we are also targeting at least 10 million households to go into drink from tap. So we're trying to improve the service levels, and there is some momentum there about that also. So right now, as of now, as I'm speaking, we have almost approved $30 billion worth of projects, and it's all getting grounded at various stages, and the projects are going on. And already in our earlier mission, we spent around $11 billion. So we very much focused, one, resources committed, two, planning is done, capacities are built. Now the states have learned and cities have learned by doing. And now we are looking at outcomes. Yeah, that's where it exists.
Thank you for such a detailed overview, Athara ma'am. I would request Somila, if you could tell a bit more about the recent partnership between Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs and World Bank, aiming for 100 water secure cities. What are the priorities, what are the regions, and then how it is planned in overall approach?
Thank you. Good morning and good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be joining you. This 100 cities engagement is a request from the Government of India, from Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. Madam Thara is connected. To have the World Bank and ADB work with Mahua, the Ministry of Housing and Urban, on 100 cities diagnostic. And the idea is to figure out what will it take to shift the needle on these 100 cities on water supply, sanitation, and solid waste management, and take them to the next level. And in this request, there's an emphasis on bankable projects. So right now we are working with the ministry, our teams, on outlining this knowledge note or this paper that will be ready for discussion around middle of December. So that's what we're doing. It is not a project as yet. It's a diagnostic. And so that's the story. There's a very heavy emphasis on financing and bankability. And Bhavna, in your opening, you talked about how public finance is not enough. I'll take a moment on that separately. So that World Bank report that you mentioned said that basically 93% of globally of finance for water is coming from the public sector, about 6% from multilateral development banks, and only 2% from the private sector. But that report also said that of the money that is spent by the public sector, 28% is left on the table. I mean, the budgets that are allocated, 28% is left unspent. So there is public finance, although it is small, some of it is still left on the table. So the need is to increase the amount of public finance going into water supply and sanitation, improving its use and actually using all of that, and then using some of that money to leverage and crowd in private finance. So in this 100 Cities initiative, there's a very heavy focus on how the Ministry of Finance wants to know what are the ways in which we can move the financing needle away from pure taxpayer dependency to more of a ratepayer scenario and bring in the private sector to with their capital, but also their expertise to improve service delivery. So that's the focus a little bit. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Samala. I think I want to discuss a bit more on public finance versus rate making and how some of these services could be sustainable. But at this moment, I want to bring in Austin. And Austin Xylem is a $8 billion water technology company operating in 150 companies, including India. And could you share a bit more about how Xylem is engaging in India? How are you looking at India as a market? What is the investment outlook and what are the strategic priorities for Xylem in India?
Yes, thank you. Good morning or good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for the opportunity to join this panel. Yeah, as you mentioned, Xylem is a water technology company. So we are supplying the technology components required to treat, move, test water across the water cycle. About half of our revenue comes from the utilities sector, the water, wastewater utilities, and the remaining split across water management for industrial purposes or commercial buildings. So we have a nice perspective in how different sectors and different regions around the world are making investments in water. Our mission is to enable water security across our customers, in this case, predominantly the cities and governments making investments, but also those industrial users. And some of the strategic priorities that we have laid out as a company and are very applicable to our business in India are first investing in software and services or digital solutions for water technology. We are very good at building the hard infrastructure piece of water as a sector and often overlook the data component. And there's quite and the ways that we can better manage that infrastructure once it is installed. So that's a strategic priority for us and something we see that catches quite a bit of traction in India, where data management and collection, asset management is increasingly important as was previously stated, the significant ramp up in water access is happening. And then the other is more on the industrial water management, but I think is relevant to this conversation, is on services management. So where industrial companies that are using water are needing somebody to come in and manage the water system on their behalf. They're not water experts. They don't want to be. And I think what that really positions us well to help support is what the comments earlier discussing where we can find that alignment of industrial water to the municipality. I think there's real opportunity there, especially in a region like India, where industrial investments are happening at a very rapid pace, as are the utility investments.
Thank you, Austin, for that. And I want to bring in Thara ma'am on this point. Could you share how are you looking at, the overview that you shared about the priorities of the ministry and what is necessary for urban India? What are the potential opportunities for private sector to come in and play a role? And what are the challenges, that you're seeing right now in engaging with private sector?
See, across the globe, having private money as a dominant factor in water sector has never been the case so far. I don't think anywhere it's really the main driver. So as far as private sector is concerned, in any case, all the projects which are getting executed through private sector, but not from their money, from the government's money. So that is the scenario. Now, why are we not able to get private sector into water? That's, private sector finance into water. Private sector is into water. They are the contractors, they are the tenders. So the whole ecosystem is actually attributing a stereotypic role to the private sector. So there is a project to be made at a used water treatment plant or a drinking water treatment plant or laying a pipeline or giving connections and so on and so forth. How do we actually leverage the efficiencies of the private sector? So that is where our whole focus has to be in the structural change. Now that will happen if the governing institutions and the service providing institutions are disaggregated. There are utility companies which can come in and do that. So because today, and at the same time, these utility companies should be close to the people. So it's a little bit of a difficulty because, there are this elected people who are manning the local governments, and there is an engineering wing or this thing works with them, or a parastatal at the state level which works for providing these services. So now in all this, how do we bring in private sector and give them that little space? Now, it's a very sensitive issue to charge for water. How much? How do we? So I think even if we get private sector, it will be a little bit of difficulty to make them invest and make profits and get away with it, because it is going to be difficult. It will take a little bit of time. We may not be able to pull it off across a city, but we can pull it off in some wards of a city. So we may have to take a graded approach. So we take some of the wards, some of the areas which are affluent, which are using a lot of water, because it's always, the economic capability is what the water capability will also be. So how do we actually do that is the question. But as far as the used water is concerned, there's a huge scope and a lot of, like as of now, I think around 2000 MLD of water is getting recycled by sale of water to the industries. So there are very good examples where the private sector has invested and made it good. So there is a good opportunity in used water sector, but water as a whole, as a service, as a drinking water service, it's still a bit of a challenge. Where we expect the private finance to come in, but we can have a VGF model, viability gap funding model, because there has to be, but it's doable. Coimbatore is doing, some of the cities have picked up, they're doing it. So I think it's a matter of time that before we get to there. The second part is technology. Now, what technology we ask for is what we understand as the best technology. I think it's a high time that there's a good dialogue between private and public about what could be done, not only for profits, but as a global good. Private sector has to talk the language of providing knowledge and sharing wisdom for the global good. That means, if there is water, there's no value which you can attribute to how we pollute our rivers or how we pollute our water bodies, and it affects everybody, whether it is India or the whole of the globe, because the methane emerging from that wastewater is going to affect the whole globe. It's not going to stay above India only. So I think there has to be a larger dialogue between public and private sector, apart from the money and business part. How do we bring in that is the most important part.
Thank you for sharing that. And I just want to bring in Austin on that. Austin, your input on that would be critical because, you're a technology company. There are solutions. You've seen other models.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And couldn't agree more with the comments just made. We have as a tendency, and I will admit both as the technology provider, but as the sector as a whole, it is easier to do what we have always done sometimes versus test more innovative technologies and models. And I think that is both the opportunity and frankly responsibility of the private sector in water to be bringing more innovative solutions to bear. And in regions like India, where we're seeing very high innovation technology adoption, the goals and ambitions are so large that we are seeing a leapfrog in solutions happening that we don't see in other regions of the world. So it's a prime place for us to make bets on really innovative and cool technologies that are, as mentioned, will have implications around the world. I'll speak just really briefly on how we want to do that at Xylem. We are a large technology company. We have both credibility in the marketplace as well as the balance sheet and financial stability to help bring many of those earlier stage technologies to bear while providing confidence in the adopters of technology to make the bet that we will come in and stand behind what solution we provide, even if it is from a startup or technology outside of our portfolio. So we have a group within Xylem called our Xylem Innovation Labs, and that is their job. They're scouting what is the new technology out there, where we want to make some smart bets as far as solutions that we can come in together as startup and Xylem pilot together so that we're helping to de-risk some of the adoption curve that very understandably a municipality may not want to make, but provide the balance sheet and background of Xylem behind this pilot so that we can help do our responsibility of bringing the most innovative solutions to bear.
Thank you, Austin. And Samula, I wanted to ask you, in continuation of this, what you mentioned about 2% of the water investment comes from the private sector. So one is, when you look at it, as you've, done this study, which was at a global nature, who are the kind of people who are investing in the sector, both globally and then, what are the potential platforms that we could engage investors? As Tara ma'am mentioned, that, how do you get people to be interested in getting in their private money, but creating those sort of platforms?
Thanks, Bhavna. So there are different models of private sector participation in water. The easiest ones are when there is a ring-fenced project, where there is a clear buyer or set of buyers. So, for example, in Latin America, there are a couple of initiatives where a mining company needed treated wastewater. So a private entrepreneur or company came in, takes all of the wastewater from that town, treats it, and provides it to this mining company for their mining operations. So for the municipality, this is a win-win because they don't have to do any of the investment and financing, and this private operator can sell this water, treated water, to the mining operation. So, and this kind of thing you see in India as well. So Tamil Nadu has a couple of treated wastewater plants, both TTRO and TTUF plants, and they sell to industry, and the tariff is fairly high. And it's probably the only profitable part of the Metro Water's operations is the treated wastewater that they sell. But for that to work, you need to have, the alternate sources shouldn't be available easily or shouldn't be free. Otherwise, nobody will pay for the treated wastewater. So the minute you have the ability, there's a revenue stream, then you can have a private sector. Another place is where the government invites them on a concession basis. So for example, in Karnataka, there are 3 towns in which we are supporting the government of Karnataka to move to 24/7. So there's an operator in these 3 medium-sized towns. There is enough of a faith built into the model that they will get paid if they do their job, right? So there is the tariffs are not high enough to cover the cost of the concession, but as Tharaji was saying earlier, the government will pay, so they can come in and bring in their private sector efficiencies, and the service is improving from a few hours every few days to 24/7. It's already expanded to several wards, and it's going to go citywide. And in fact, in this 100 Cities program, this was one of the examples Ministry of Finance talked about, how to make more of these things happen. And they're starting to happen. Tamil Nadu is trying to do that, as ma'am was saying, in Coimbatore, but also Salem and Trichy. The point is how to get more of these to happen and give some comfort to the private sector that they are not going to be left holding the bag on all the expenses. So I'll just stop there. Happy to elaborate further if needed. Thanks.
Just a follow-up question on that. As we've seen, blended capital, risk capital coming in to act as a catalyst on some of the projects in other sectors. Do you see a role of that coming in here? Are there examples? Is that something that you're prioritizing?
Yes. So there is a lot of talk about blue capital, green capital, carbon credits. And the World Bank is just launching a Livable Planet Fund. And interestingly, I just had an email today that the government of Assam is very interested in building blended finance from this Livable Planet Fund to lower their cost of borrowing from a World Bank for a World Bank supported project. So these are nascent, but I think more of this needs to happen. And the markets for these, the blue and green finance need to come into play. So just like the carbon market took off and then collapsed because the price of carbon kind of collapsed, there is the need for an international mechanism to value and trade some of these blue credits, green credits, carbon credits. But blended finance is very much on the agenda, and hopefully it will start to take off. I think there's a lot of work going into designing products that try to support countries, states, and cities in using blended finance for doing things that have a positive externality on the planet. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you. And I think at this moment, I wanted to come back to the point that, Thara ma'am in her initial remarks mentioned, and then we followed up on. I think so far the infrastructure and services have been largely financed by public funds. There have been national programs. And I think, ma'am, what you mentioned, that we're making attempts to unlock how some of the recovery could happen, but there are challenges related to the value of water. I just want you to reflect and share. Would we continue to see more public funds coming in, or we would also try and see how taxes and tariffs could come to play, maybe in some of the pilot wards districts that you mentioned?
I think it's very clear that the money is coming from government. It is coming from taxes and tariffs only. The only thing is it is not linked to the water per se. Yeah. It is actually coming from elsewhere. So I think it's very important. I think we should quickly do the valuation of water. It has to be valuation of water. So, if the citizen knows this is the amount which has been spent on reaching this water to your doorstep, then it will be valuable. I think we are undertaking some exercise for that, so that we don't need to collect it from them, but sensitizing the people that it's not coming free of cost. It is a lot of effort and a lot of money goes behind it is important. Because many a times, unless you clearly manifest the value of what you're doing, things may not be understood in that sense. So that's one thing. Second thing is, I think if you really want the private sector to come in, again, there has to be a confidence building measure that you need to have that guarantee. Even if the governments change, if the term of, because water projects, if you bring in a private sector, it cannot be for 5 years. It will be for 15, 20 years. So that is where the disaggregation of governance and management of services has to be done. And how we do it is a major challenge, but we need to do that across the globe, not only from in India. And third thing is, we are saying there is not much of investment of water from private sector. I think the way we are accounting for it is very, very, the way it is seen in Western countries. In India, I am sure the water is being invested for by the citizens equally in terms of space in their houses, tanks, the kind of connections they take and the pipes, and there's so much effort which goes in, so much money which goes in. I think it's equally bad. I think they must also be spending around 20% of the money. So that is not being accounted for. Whereas in a Western country, the water is reached to the tap and that's all. Whereas in India, it's not so. There is an intermediate, and there is also invariably, there's also a filtration mechanism which is put in place to avoid this thing. Because still, I think we need to go ahead and build confidence about the quality of water very much. Though I can tell you today, we had done a survey and tested all the water treatment plant outlets, and we got 98% quality compliance, not less. But as I told you, as it reaches the household, there's a problem because of various factors. So we have to look at, we have to build confidence. So water as a conversation has to change its shape and size in terms of how people look at water. Yeah, that's about it.
Thank you, ma'am. I think it's a very powerful statement. Putting a value to water will ensure that, it is perceived in a different way than it is right now. I just want to look at the, one particular aspect, as you mentioned, about water governance, utilities, and how systemic changes should come together. I've heard you in your other interviews talking about smart technologies in water management systems. And also, International Water Association has done this analysis that India loses about 5 billion annually in non-revenue water. Would you share, how are you thinking about it and if there are any development models? And I think I'll also request Austin and Sumila to jump in on this particular aspect because it's tangible and there are systems and solutions available. Over to you, ma'am.
See, there is non-revenue water and there is water lost due to leakages. Now, non-revenue water in a Western parlance is something which is a water which is not accounted for in terms of revenue. Whereas in India, when you send water, it goes to several places and there are, people do take connections both in the formal way, informal way. That is one part of the story. And then there's a lot of leakages. So one of the biggest model which will help is if you make it continuous water supply. So we have to change our model from providing water at a particular point of time to continuous water supply. Because then it comes with, that's first thing. Of course, as I told you, 10 million households are being tried for that across India in the next 3-4 years. And we have already initiated projects worth around $3 billion into it. The second thing is, I think we have now started non-revenue water estimation. See, what happens is as a democratic country and as a democratic setup, there's a lot of pressure because we are still grappling with the fact that water is nature given, God has given it, nobody can charge it types. Now we have to change that perspective, but that will take a little bit of time, but we can always use bulk meters. So now we are actually looking at SCADAs and bulk meters to be put and looked at in a holistic manner. This is happening in a big way in India. It's not that, anymore. So at least we have an estimation. So sometimes the non-revenue water part is a little more pronounced than actual non-revenue water because there are illegal connections. People are taking water to drink, but they are not accounted for in the system. So that is different from something which is lost due to leakage from the system. So these are two different concepts. But I think there is a good awareness and a lot of big cities have their systems in place to check what is the water loss. I can say, yes, there are cities which have brought it down up to 15%, 20%, like Coimbatore, it's brought it down by 15%. Nagpur, it has again brought it down. So wherever this 24/7 water supply systems or drink from tap water supply systems are taking shape, there this is actually getting attended to. However, we are also encouraging bulk meters to ensure that when you supply water, how much you lose in the process of this thing. Yeah, that's also is being done. And one more thing is we are encouraging new technologies. See, water loss is equal to how do we avoid it? So what we are doing is actually even this whole sub-DMA level. District metered area is one part, but there is a sub-DMA level where the meters are fixed and there is connections to various households. There's a model which is going on, very interesting model. I think that is like water equity. Once you put the water, you can only draw that much from the system. I don't know such a system exists in other countries or not, but in one part of India, one small ward, it has started. So you can draw your water 24 hours from that system. And the moment you draw 500 liters, if you are entitled to 501 liter cannot be drawn. So that is a very close system and clear system. My dream is to have that system across India. I will want to look at that very closely. I think I've never seen the system elsewhere. So somebody has done that and it's very interesting. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just keen about the word.
Yeah.
You were saying one ward in India.
Yeah, that is in Coimbatore. Actually, when I went there and visited the households, nobody knew who the elected councillor was because they never had a problem with water. So from morning till evening, you can draw. Today's water quota is given and it is you can draw it anytime. Nobody is going to able to draw that water from that. Actually, it's a very interesting model. I mean, I'm not seeing such a model. So I'm trying to tell Coimbatore to follow it in other wards also. It has been done. But it's a very interesting model. I think it's to be looked at if water equity is to be maintained. Because if you have, say, not 500 to be given to every household and 200, even then that can be done in this system because you just need to adjust and there's a solenoid magnetic this thing which will stop the water beyond that. You know that sensors. It will stop. So there's no question of any leakage. Your water is in the system for you and it is in the system. Anytime you want to draw, you can. I mean, what better thing can be there? I mean, that's a system which, but yeah, we have a lot of technologies. We have a lot of innovations. We are associated with 105 startups in 67 cities. So we are also onboarding startups through a startup gateway continuously. Yeah.
Thank
So
you
I
for
think
sharing.
a lot of technology is coming in. Yeah.
Yeah. I think with Austin, I have a follow-up question. Like, there is innovation happening, there is adoption, and then also how some of these technologies come and situate within the public procurement system. And maybe, ma'am, if you have any thought on that, how do you ensure that, it is time efficient, it is ensuring that the investment made on technology testing and then piloting is then moving forward in implementation phase?
Yeah, happy to answer that. And before I do, I just wanted to reflect back on, I'm not familiar with that project in particular, but what a great example of when the water provider and the end user, the household have the same data and there's no question in the gap of data between the two. I have this much water and here's where I'm at. That is, I think where we all need to get to because it is really provides, as you mentioned, a wonderful case of very happy end users and a much better managed water supply. To get back to your question on the procurement side, it is a challenge, and I'll speak from a global perspective because we see a lot of the same challenges across the world. For very good reason, the water sector as a whole is slow to adopt new technologies. We often don't want to have the newest technology on something so critical as our water supply. And so what that inherently happens is that innovative water solutions typically have a very long adoption curve from a startup into what they could be financially viable business. And so we historically lose a lot of great innovative talent to do these startups as well as the innovation itself. And so where we're trying to fill that gap as Xylem is help steward some of those technologies faster through that pipeline, get into the pilot stage faster, bring them forward with the backing of a Xylem to help. But it still remains a big challenge to bring innovative solutions to bear. I think some areas where we see a lot of glimmers of hope are on the financing side, as you mentioned, where we can do things like performance-based financing, where we can come in and provide perhaps as water management as a service or water services through the technology that are more subscription-based versus the traditional capital bid projects. I think that's where we need to see the next phase of the greatest innovation. Today, we're seeing a wonderful surge in technological innovation happening in water. We're getting some really fabulous talent coming into startup community, into the innovation on the technology side. In order to meet that wave, we need to really start advancing quite quickly the innovation in the financing model. Or otherwise, we will not be able to adopt all of this great technology coming to bear right now.
Thank you, Austin. Similar what Austin mentioned about performance-based contracts, and that's something I think World Bank has been implementing elsewhere. And then do you want to reflect on what she said and then how performance-based contract could be an entry point for governments and private sector to work effectively?
Yes, thank you. Actually, this is a very good question because it links several of the aspects that we've discussed. So right at the beginning, Tharaji said that we are investing all these billions of dollars and now we are shifting to outcomes. And I think that's a critical piece. And you just talked about a performance-based contracting. So if Indian water service providers start focusing on outcomes, service delivery outcomes, and certain kinds of input efficiency metrics, you will start to see an entirely different set of results and technology usage compared to if it is just infrastructure investment. I think Austin also mentioned we are doing better on infrastructure creation than in its management and the use of data and technology in improving management of that infrastructure for service delivery. So I think if we say, okay, we have been investing in infrastructure and this will continue, but we now need to start putting an extra layer of performance and outcomes in this story. That's the first step. Then the second step, so you start to say, okay, I need to have a reduction in the water losses, whether we call it non-revenue water or not. I'm generating 100 units, but I'm distributing to the household level 60 or 70 or whatever, and I need to reduce the amount that is lost between the treatment plant and the household. For that, you need bulk meters and retail meters, and you can go to your customers and to your agencies to say, we are going to have universal metering, charges no bar. And as Tharaji was saying, then they at least start to get a bill which says, you use so many units of water, this was the cost, and you paid 5 cents out of the 50 cents that it cost us to deliver it to you. So they start valuing it over time. So essentially that pivot from infrastructure construction to service delivery and outcomes. And another couple of things that have happened under things like the Amrut program. So my team was just in Navi Mumbai. They're not very interested in energy efficiency, but because Amrut had some support for energy efficiency, they replaced some highly inefficient pumps. Now, this is not even a new technology. We are not even talking about world-class technology. Energy efficiency payments have payback periods of 1 to 2.5 years. So that means you're printing money and the private sector is willing to come in as long as you say that, okay, I'm going to share the cost savings on energy with you. It'll pay for itself. But none of the utilities are bending over backwards to do this, and 70% of their costs are energy, right? So I really feel Austin's pain when she says, they're a slow adopter. But I think if we started moving towards outcomes, saying your costs need to go down, your energy efficiency needs to improve, we'll reward that. See how quickly that adoption starts to shift. And then just a couple of other quick points. In some of the contracts that we've been supporting, for example, in the Ganga cleanup program in India, a lot of the bids for wastewater treatment plants and reuse facilities have become technology agnostic. So the performance indicators are, this is the result that's needed, and you can use whatever technology you want to use. And you're starting to see innovation in the kind of technology that's coming into the wastewater treatment plants over there. So those are some of the ways to square the circle. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Samila. Thank you for sharing so many examples and very contextual. I wanted to pick up, I think, one word that Austin mentioned, and I think what we're talking about from a sector point of view is talent. And, as we look at the capacities which are locally available, whether it is in the used water or sanitation space, or working within the utilities. And what we see is engineering and then management, some of those capabilities. As we're thinking of looking at sector to undergo a massive transformation, how are we looking at talent, as an issue? And maybe, ma'am, if you have any thoughts on that, as part of the KPI-driven mechanism mentioned in Amrut, what are you seeing, as the program is underway?
That's for me, right? Yeah. See, as the program is underway, we are looking at water security. So we are looking at water security for Indian cities, which is a larger goal. So if you're looking at water security, then you have to look at every part of the value chain of water, including the underground water, groundwater recharge, shallow aquifer management. Then, you're looking at reuse and treated reuse of water. Then you're looking at actually demand management of water. So we're looking at water security. While the whole idea is to catalyze project implementation to provide outcomes, we're looking at connections, how many connections are given, what's happening. We do periodic surveys to look at from the citizens what's happening. But when you're looking at water security, then the story changes from just providing services to going towards water balances. How well you approve for water. So this is now the key. KPIs are several of this. I mean, once you're talking about water security, you'll find out how much is the water requirement of the city. See, water security at the citizen level is slightly different from water security at the city level. Citizen is about getting the water in their houses clean, and adequate quantities, and if possible, all the time. And versus city level, where at the city level, you have to look at, if you have to know how you want to manage water security for the citizen, then you need to know how will you apportion water, depending on various scenarios. So that's water governance becomes a different this thing. But we all do that on a daily basis, but a larger plan is to be put in place. Second thing is, we are looking at cities, but what happens to the rural areas which are feeding water into the cities? How do they operate as urban-rural continuum? So that the KPIs could be how much of clean water sources are available near the city. When you talk about source dependency, source conservation. So what are you looking at will determine the KPIs. Ultimately, we want to have water for life. And one more thing which I want to bring in is, we are now doing a very interesting program, it might be of interest, that we are calling it Jal Jeevan Mission, means water, water is gold, or Golden Water Initiative, where the present STPs, the sewage treatment plants which are operating, may not be operating efficiently, may not be operating. So we are grading them all the parameters by visits, then capacity building them, giving them water credits, and giving them money as per the credit for them to, either put in, improvise, or improve the O&M. Somebody had asked questions about O&M. O&M is part of a infrastructure project. They have to have 5 years O&M, operational management, as part of the contract. In urban, it's easier handled compared to rural. In JJM, it becomes difficult a bit because it's varied. Whereas in urban, it's more complex infrastructure, typical infrastructure, water treatment plants, pipelines, and so on and so forth. So it becomes easier. Easier means it is definitely mandatory and required. So what we are looking at is KPI in terms of, we are also asking questions like when we do survey, how long do you take time to address a grievance? Because that is directly related to non-revenue water. If there is a pipe leakage, if you don't address your grievance, how do you get your grievance and address it? That's a very important point. So KPIs are mainly quality, quantity, accessibility, reuse, energy efficiency of the existing system. Then we're also looking at the how much is the water available, source dependency, diversification of sources, so on and so forth. I mean, these are broadly the things which we look at. Yeah.
So in the interest of time, I just wanted to pick up one topic, which is the current capacities of the human resources which are deployed in the sector, the need for upskilling, some of that. So, ma'am, if you could give very brief response, because we don't want to finish on time.
I think capacity, capacity in India has been built up because we have been running these missions to 2050. We used to have 750 contractors working for Amrut 1 part. Now, Amrut 2 part, we have 3,000 contractors working. And we are training them. In India, for the first time, we are training them at our cost. Though that is where, organizations like yours, we have a running training, very live training module with American Water Works Association. We have with Australia. We have with Israel. As we are talking from Monday, there's a IIT Madras, Israel. So this is where using technology, we are training contractors from by contractors, by companies like Austin can volunteer for this and we'll be happy to link her up to our contractors. So that's what we are doing. And so far we have trained 3,000 contractors and domain specific training. If they are into water rejuvenation, then we are doing that. They're doing the water supplies. I'll be doing that. A lot of capacity is required. Another thing, new technology. That's what I said. We fund startups. We give some meager money to startups, 20 lakh rupees. I don't know how many dollars it is. I think it's around $22,000, $25,000. Free, just funded. And the startups are allowed to prove one technology in a city and we link up them. So that brings in new technology. That's another capacity building. Third is we are actually mobilizing women, self-help group women. So far, 5,000 women are participating. Our target is to take it to 1 lakh women. It just started. Where the women are part of the infrastructure management. They're trained and they're given work. Again, we give money to them, small projects, around $12,000 for 3 months. Yeah, that's how we are managing.
Thank you very much for such an elaborative. I want to give Austin and Sumila a moment to respond very briefly.
Yeah, yes. I'm so glad that we're talking about this topic in particular because it is easy to get caught up in the technological advancements, but the capacity to be able to run systems and run the technology and in our case, develop technology is a key piece of the resiliency of our business. We're making quite a bit of investment just within Xylem on making sure that we're bringing talent into our company and eventually into the sector that can be both knows the traditional water management systems, but is also thinking in ways of how we adopt new innovative solutions, particularly around digital and data management and all the components that we talked about earlier. So this is incredibly important to us. And I think globally, the water sector is about to face some real talent challenges. And so I think we're going to continue to see this being a critical piece of investment and innovation.
Sumila, your 30-second response, please. Yes.
Yes, very briefly. I'll take a slightly different angle. Let's look at a water department or water agency. In the smaller towns, there are no people. There's one engineer for the municipality covering roads, stormwater, water. So if you want to have capacity in a water supply sanitation, each city and the state need to figure out, are you going to have a department that is going to have the staff to do the O&M themselves, operations and maintenance of the system themselves? Or are you going to have a system where you're going to contract out that service delivery, and therefore your capacity is going to be in contract management, sophisticated contract management. So those are a couple of choices. Right now, there aren't enough people, let alone upskilling people to run the systems. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this thrilling discussion. I am grateful to all of you for your candid responses and sharing. I will not try and summarize it. We are at time. We're beyond time. I will close the discussion. Thank you very much for making time for this. Thank you.